Never was there a time when you were not. There will never be a time when you cease to be. Existence without beginning or end has been revealed by Sri Bhagavan to be the very nature of the self. It is necessary then to discern existence itself so that you remain in blissful immortality, free of the least trace of misidentification, which manifests as the anxious thought that takes the form of unhappiness. Existence never becomes non-existent. So there is no before existence or after existence. Existence is eternal. That which is eternal existence is what you are. What you are always. What has a beginning and an end is not existence itself. What has a beginning and an end, a creation and a destruction, or a birth and a death, cannot be your very existence. And what is not your very existence is not truly yourself at all. Inquire, so that existence knows itself as it is. If we are bodies, then we have a beginning and an end in space, in time. But are we bodies? If you are not the body, then by the same light, you are not embodied. For your existence will not be one thing at one time and another thing at another time. But existence always simply exists. That is pure being. It is absolute, utterly non-dependent, transcendent of every name and form. Free of definition in terms of the perceptible and the conceivable. What is it within you that never began? What is it within you that will never end? That which begins and ends, that which has a before and an after, is neither you nor truly yours. Existence alone is itself. Existence alone can know itself. Existence belongs to existence alone. The unreal does not possess the real. The real does not possess the unreal. The unreal never becomes the real. The real never becomes the unreal. The reality, absolute existence, Brahman, alone exists. This is yourself, your true identity. Innate to this is blissful immortality. Discriminate what is eternal and what is not eternal, knowing that to be eternal which actually exists. Discriminate between the eternal and the non-eternal, recognizing that the eternal alone can be what you actually are. What begins that cannot be you? What ends that cannot be you? Unborn, unending. Such is truly yourself. Make every effort to realize this conclusively. So with certainty, you abide in supreme peace.
Master, I had a question regarding tracing the thoughts back. So essentially in my inquiry, when I do the inquiry, I see I am this when my thoughts are passing along, and I inquire as I am this, and then I take one set of thoughts which I want to focus on, and then I trace it back to the source. And when I trace it back to the source, I see a separate I image of mine. Separate I image of mine in that. But then I don't have enough arguments. Like I start with the arguments when I take it to the source, that you don't exist without me, without my light. You don't exist in deep dreamless sleep. So those arguments suffice for a while, but those thoughts come up again. Like so tracing it back and deducing arguments, like maybe my arguments are not powerful enough to take that train of thoughts to its roots.
For whom do the thoughts appear?
To I.
And what is the significance of that? What is the meaning of I? All the thoughts refer to yourself, supposedly. They are utterly dependent on that. The one who knows them, who appears to think them, whether they're occurring for the first time, whether they're recurring. Wonder, inquire, who is this I? Can he be a thinker? There's no need to think he's not a thinker. Inquiry is deep interior knowledge, in which the I-ness of the I vanishes. All the reasonable arguments are expressions of something beyond every argument. They're a way of pointing out something that is non-objective and inconceivable. And that something is what you truly are.
Master, do not, as you pointed out last time, a couple of times, do not identify with perceivable, perceived and inconceivable. But the arguments is also important in the inquiry, like continuous arguments within the train of thoughts.
They are auxiliary. To the degree that they're helpful, use them. But the actual inquiry means to abide as that to which the arguments point. If you accept with faith or conviction the arguments presented by Vedanta that negate everything else, what is that reality? What is that pure existence in you that remains after all that has been negated? All that can be negated has been negated. What is that?
Sir, another question regarding the waking state. Waking state, like I am the unperceivable reality, which is unconceivable and unperceivable. But the things out there, I mean, there is no out there in consciousness. But when they exist, they borrow their existence from me. So they have some reality to them too, right? Since they borrow the existence from me for a while, like let's say, a few minutes or a few hours, they have existence too, right? Like,
How do they manage to do that? In order for them to become borrowers, they must exist already. But do they have such separate existence to begin with? When it is said that they have a borrowed existence, the emphasis is on the reality, the unmodified, imperturbable nature of reality, that is all that ever is, and not that actual borrowing has occurred. It does not mean that the perceived and the conceived have some kind of existence to them, some degree of separate reality, even in the least. The meaning is clear. There is only one absolute existence, changeless, forever. And all that one imagines as the perceived and the conceived, right there is actually only this absolute existence, or Brahman. There is nothing else. Just like the rope imagined to be the snake. We may say the snake has a borrowed reality, but is there a snake at all? The only thing there is the rope. There's not a trace of snakiness in it.
I'll inquire into that, Master. I had one more question which I wanted to ask, but I asked something else. Was a why question. I know why would belong to time and space and causality. The why question is, why would consciousness needs to experience itself through different body minds, through thoughts and feelings, to know itself?
I don't know. Why? You're the one who's come up with the theory that it's doing this.
Either one more question, right? One more question adds up to more.
If we imagine any kind of differentiation, then we'll have to also imagine reasons for that differentiation. If we inquire, for whom are the differences? For whom is the differentiation? The sense of reality, as well as identity, returns to its rightful state, in which there is no differentiation whatsoever. Then there is no need to explain how or why the differences came to be, because they did not come to be. Otherwise, one will be ascribing all kinds of motives to consciousness, much in the way that one ascribes all kinds of attributes and activities to God. But how does God see God? In other words, know consciousness as it is, by the light of the consciousness, and then see if there are differences to explain.
So it is obvious, and because it's obvious, it cannot be pinpoint. It cannot be defined. It's obvious, and it's because it's obvious, so close, and it's it, right? So how, when I try to describe it, I create a distance, and that distance is artificial. And it's duplicity. There's this like misconception to try to define what it is already in. And in spite of that, there are descriptions in poetry, in art, in Upanishads and Gitas, that seems to describe the indescribable. This description, I assume, is a silent description of himself. This is what I grab it from, being so obvious and so close to it.
Yes, so for this reason silence is most eloquent. The same silence is resounding through the words of the Scriptures. It is their potency to describe the utterly indescribable is another sign of grace. But the reality itself remains ineffable, beyond description.
They call it lila, pastime. One of the ways describing it is a lila, the lila of himself.
We can give it any name we like.
That's a nice name. That's a soft, playful way to see it. Not so heavy, not so problematic, not so separate. It's kind of childlike. Oh, it's a lila, it's a play. Oh, I can play with it. More than it's a problem. I have to seek in and conquer. Like Alexander the Great, I'm gonna conquer it. It's not a fight, or it's more like a letting go, a state of being.
Where the eye vanishes, there the truth shines. As far as the descriptions are concerned, to one who abides eyeless in the knowledge of the self, all the descriptions are of as much use as a pond when everywhere there's a flood.
There's what saying they say it says, look for the things that are favorable, and reject the things that are not, that are unfavorable.
I approached today's satsang as if it was the last satsang I was ever going to go to. And so I asked myself, what's the most important thing that I would desire out of the last satsang? And it's a pretty obvious answer. It's self-realization. So when I listened to your discourse, I listened for just what do I need to know. And also being the last satsang, I know some other things other than what might be obviously said. So that is just to inquire. And I started to inquire to see, is there actually someone who's not realized? Does that one actually exist? And that really requires the assumption of individuality. And without that, there's not an unrealized state. So the one who would supposedly be self-realized is that same one. That apparent individualized one. And so if I ask myself, am I that one that's going to be self-realized? He doesn't exist either. So then the question is, who am I? That's the eternal satsang.
Sat has no beginning or end. Sat means reality, being, existence, truth. Then what does the second half of the word mean? Satsang. Association. What does it mean to associate with the truth?
Eliminate the ego.
If the ego is eliminated, then it's an association of one. One existence, which is Sat. Of course, there is satsang in the common use of the word. which is also precious. The invaluable opportunity to be in the company of the wise. That should always be sought and never neglected. One should not trade that opportunity for anything else. For within that time of satsang, one slips into the eternal, the timeless. And proceeds from the unreal, asat, to the real, sat. Which is also to go from darkness to light, and from death to immortality.
I heard what you said. You brought these things to me. The only one in the discourse you say, and it's true, it's only one existing. So how can in that one existing we can come from mortality to immortality if it's only immortality the truth?
The mortality is an illusion born of imagination. Realization of truth puts that imagination to an end. The non-eternal is realized to be non-existent, and one's own self is realized to be the eternal alone. In this way, the immortal attains itself.
And that deception of immortality comes through the ego, misidentification, right? Ignorance, false concepts. And that borns out the identification from the so-called outside, right? So like me and you, and the division, the duplicity that exists in relation with the sense.
All that illusion arises only after the primary delusion of I am the body. Then there are others, I, you, he, she, it, the world, etc. If we trace these to their source, we find all these others, the perception of such, the differences in such, entirely depend on the definition of the I. Clarifying that definition or undefining him to leave him in his natural state is liberation from the illusion. The illusion is never created by the illusion. It's one's own delusion. Likewise is it with bondage and suffering of any kind. These do not come to us from external sources. They appear within us until such time as we know ourself, in which case illusion, delusion, bondage, suffering, and the rest of it disappear.
That happens when the so-called body manifests as a baby and is starting to relate with the mother, and then the mother seems to be outside, and it creates all these delusions of me and the other me in the world, my necessities, and
Yes, but were you born?
no. But that comes after I'm mature and I'm inquire and I awake from that state and finally really born. But not everybody borns and become aware. It's an effort at the beginning that I have to do because I was misled by a set of circumstances, so-called circumstances,
Or your belief in them?
or I believe in them. But then
So you were not misled by circumstances, you were misled by your own mind's beliefs.
Yes. But then, that, like you say, that's what is so important to be in Satsang and inquire back to the truth and erase all this delusion that borns out of so-called necessity.
It's like awakening from a long dream.
Yes. Since I read in a book that the ego has to mature enough so it can fall by itself out of the tree.
That's like saying the snake has to grow old enough so we can realize that there's only a rope.
Yeah. Well, I said, ego doesn't exist, but inevitable. Somehow I thought that it exists. And I was misidentified with that ego for so many years until I started to inquire, and then I peel the onion and the hollowness appeared.
Such is the manifestation of grace in one's own self-effort.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
There are many things fascinating about your discourse today, but one that I would ask about is kind of a sort of an application, I guess. When I've heard about reality as bliss, it reminds me not to look for happiness or its nature incorrectly. In somewhat the same way, your theme today seemed to eliminate the need to be attached to things that would ensure survival, as if to have persistent existence, like to be well thought of. You wouldn't readily connect it, but you could think of it as a sort of a survival attachment, acquisitiveness, even when it's meaningless.
There were people around many hundreds of thousands of years ago. You think their reputation matters?
But they may have thought it helped them survive at the time.
They may have had that idea, or they might have been free of it. Who can say?
But is the assurance
But does it matter at all now?
what's it?
Does it matter at all now?
Not at all.
Not to you, not to them. But existence has not ceased. If we think of them as their bodies, we think they're long gone. If we know existence beyond the body, they have neither come nor gone. And to be well thought of or ill thought of is the same. It's of absolutely no consequence.
If assured of non-dependent existence, timeless, wouldn't that also just eliminate all of that?
If you are existence, timeless existence, without beginning or end, what does it matter what the state or condition of the body is? Or to what would you be attached? What would be the meaning of good name and bad name? Or any other worldly attachment? Does Brahman care what you think of it? You are that Brahman. Timelessly existing. The perishing of everything else is inevitable. Only that which has no beginning is free of an end. Everything about the so-called person has a beginning and an end. It is rather short-lived in the scheme of things. But existence is absolute, of the nature of pure consciousness, without beginning and without end. Realize yourself to be that, and at peace. What worry do you have? Or again, detach yourself, disidentify yourself from all else, and find yourself to be just that, the absolute existence, which is peace itself. Realize this for your survival.
Yeah, and a minor survival issue. But I think it happens when I think that, just something happens when the body's just abnormally course. And that perspective that you just gave definitely blows out the perspective that I had, which is, I'm in pain, etc. So I made a mistake of going out and eating dinner at a restaurant after fasting. So I paid the price for that. Yeah, breaking a fast on restaurant food is not the ideal way to go. And I still haven't recovered from it. But that perspective that you gave, the vastness of it, I didn't have that. But in the midst of that, I could see more clearly now that should be, because approaching that way would blow away that attachment to the body. I could just see that any attachment at all, pain or whatever, suffering, would just actually make it more intense.
If there's pain in the body, it is natural to take all kinds of steps to relieve that pain. But you also know very well that there will come a time when there's pain that cannot be relieved or sickness that cannot be remedied. As certainly as the body was born, it will perish. It's inevitable. The resolve or the answer for that lies in this knowledge of what in truth you are. The body eats food. You should gobble up this wisdom.
Yeah, that's the only food that's worthwhile eating.
The body fasts from food. You should fast from misidentification. If we think we are bodies or that we're embodied, then the pain, decay, death, etc. of the body will cause us suffering. It's just actually in the natural course of events. It's not meant for us to suffer thereby. The suffering is due purely due to ignorance. Thinking we're this thing, or that we are within these sensations. But we're not. Sensations come and go. The body comes and goes. The entire universe comes and goes. The absolute existence of the self does not come and does not go. The self ever remains in its own nature, its own place, as it were. It doesn't leave that place, and it does not return to that place. Existence itself is that place. And if you know this with heartfelt conviction, if you truly deeply know this, You're not dismayed or perplexed at any time. You remain eternally as you are, which is the perfect fullness of happiness, which is of such a nature that it cannot be perceived externally, but shines in its own self-luminosity within you. Also, try eating at home next time.
Yeah. So, I've been exploring the path of bhakti. The first thing is observing that the path of self-inquiry. Well, that's not important. There's a pull to it and a feeling of being guided in that direction. And there's two things that have been really being looked at. And the first is, the Maharshi offers prayers such as, I am helpless, God alone is all powerful, and except by throwing myself on Him, there is no safety for me. I think the idea being that in that form of bhakti that I'm unable to bring about realization, however God can. So that's the first thing I would like to have some feedback on or hear your thoughts about.
What did you want to know?
If it sounds like my understanding of the method and what Maharshi is offering seems accurate.
As the ego is helpless, what recourse do you have but to throw yourself entirely upon the Supreme?
So logic is sound, that the idea that ignorance could lead to wisdom is absurd. Or seems that way to me. And then the other idea that's being looked at is that's funny, it's kind of vanished right now. There is a peace that comes with that prayer. There's a deep peace. Suppose part of it is a trust and part of it is just a statement of truth that the ego can't bring about realization.
One should devote himself to such a depth that the non-existence of the ego becomes self-evident, and so that he loves exclusively the self without other. Thus duality is erased from his mind. Supreme devotion is to remain absorbed, so that neither the idea of I nor any other idea can arise.
Yeah, and the other idea that's being looked at is surrendering to God, surrendering to God the idea of when or how realization would happen, or even if. In the discussion with Maharshi, the aristocratic woman said the longing is enough. And so it feels like there's this, the part of the surrender for me is just literally putting it all in God's hands. And there's a trust that realization is happening and will happen. And in this practice, there's the sense of even letting go through the attachment. Just putting it in God's hands. When, if, how it will happen.
Yes. If everything is placed in God's hands so that you hold nothing as your own, everything will work out fine. After all, who else is carrying all anyway? So then we can say that one's surrender or devotion is merely a deep recognition of the fact. And though while I said merely, to indicate simply, it is no trifling thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does feel like its own form of realization, realizing that God is in charge and God is in charge.
First, God is in charge. Then, God alone is.
Much contemplation and observation and asking for guidance, the path of inquiry literally unbalances the system, and so the interpretation I've attached to that is that that path isn't really appropriate for me, for this one, and for me, part of the grace of the Maharshi is that he does offer various paths depending on where the individual is in their process.
Practice to the best of your ability in the manner that most appeals to your heart. Do not bother to formulate opinions about other practices or paths, not even in relation to yourself. Be too busy practicing to formulate such opinions. That is best. All right.
परमेवाक्षरं प्रतिपद्यते स यो ह वै तदच्छायमशरीरमलोहितं शुभ्रमक्षरं वेदयते यस्तु सौम्य स सर्वज्ञः सर्वो भवति तदेष श्लोकः.
He who realizes that shadowless, bodiless, colorless, pure, immutable, attains the supreme immutable itself. O amiable one, he again who realizes becomes omniscient and all. Illustrative of this, there occurs this verse.
विज्ञानात्मा सह देवैश्च सर्वैः प्राणाभूतानि सम्प्रतिष्ठन्ति यत्र तदक्षरं वेदयते यस्तु सौम्य स सर्वज्ञः सर्वमेवाविशेति.
O amiable one, he who knows that immutable into which the cognizing self, the Purusha, who is naturally a knower, as also the organs and the elements together with all the deities merge, that omniscient one enters into everything.
स प्राणमसृज प्राणात् श्रद्धां खं वायुः ज्योतिरापः पृथिवीन्द्रियं मनः अन्नम् अन्नाद्वीर्यं तपो मन्त्राः कर्म लोका लोकेषु च नाम च.
He created prana. From prana he created faith, space, air, fire, water, earth, organs, mind, food. From food he created vigor, self-control, mantras, rites, worlds, and name in the worlds.
स यथेमान् नद्यः स्यन्दमानाः समुद्रायणाः समुद्रं प्रायः तं गच्छन्ति भिद्येते तासां नामरूपे समुद्र इत्येवं प्रोच्यते. एवमेवास्य परिद्रष्टुरिमाः षोडशकलाः पुरुषायणाः पुरुषं प्राप्यस्तं गच्छन्ति भिद्येते चासां नामरूपे पुरुष इत्येवं प्रोच्यते स एषो कलो अमृतो भवति तदेष श्लोकः.
The illustration is this. Just as these flowing rivers that have the sea as their goal get absorbed after reaching the sea, and their names and forms are destroyed, and they are called merely the sea, so also these 16 parts of the all-seeing Purusha that have the Purusha as their goal disappear on reaching the Purusha when their names and forms are destroyed, and they are simply called as Purusha. Such a man of realization becomes free from the parts and is immortal. On this point there occurs this verse.
अरायिवरधनाभौ कलायस्मिन् प्रतिष्ठिताः तं वेद्यं पुरुषं वेद यथा मावो मृत्युपरिव्रता इति.
You should know that Purusha, who is worthy to be known and in whom are transfixed the parts, like spokes in the nave of a chariot wheel, so that death may not afflict you anywhere.
तान् होवाच एतावदेहम् अतत् परं ब्रह्म वेद नातः परम् अस्ति इति.
To them he said, I know this supreme Brahman thus far only. Beyond this there is nothing.
ते तमर्चयन् तत्त्वं हिनः पिता योऽस्माकम् अविद्यायाः परं पारं तारयसीति. नमः परमर्षिभ्यो नमः परमर्षिभ्यः.
While worshipping him they said, You indeed are our Father who have ferried us across nescience to the other shore. Salutations to the great seers. Salutations to the great seers.
Chapter 23, verse 20. விரவியிடும் திக்குமில்லை விதிக்கும் இல்லை, விதிக்கு பாலகர்கள் தாமும் இல்லை. ஹரனுமில்லை ஹரியுமில்லை அயனும் இல்லை, அனந்தவித அமரரில்லை அசுரரில்லை. நரருமில்லை திரியக்கும் தானும் இல்லை, நகவனமே முதலியதாஸ்தவரமும் இல்லை. பரமஜிதா காயமதை பரசத்தாகி, பங்கமில்லாதுளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. விஸ்வன் முதல் வியஷ்டி அபிமானி இல்லை, விராட்டு முதல் சமஷ்டி அபிமானி இல்லை. அசுபமில்லா துரியமோடு துரியனில்லை, அன்னமய முதலிய ஐங்கோஷமில்லை. மிசிரமுறும் அத்தியாசம் எவையும் இல்லை, மெய் போன்ற ஜகஜீவ பரமே இல்லை. நஸ்வரமோரணுவுமில்லாத கண்டமாகி, நாசமில்லாதுளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. கல்பிதமாயொரு பொருளும் இலவே இல்லை, காலமில்லை தேசமில்லை வஸ்துவில்லை. சித் பிரம்மம் தானென்னும் தியானமில்லை, சின்மயமே பாவிக்கும் சித்தமில்லை. சத்பிரம்மம் தானெனுமோர் பேதமில்லை, சன்மாத்திர தானெனுமோர் பேதமில்லை. அற்பமுமே பேதமில்லாத கண்டமாகி, அச்சஞ்சலமாயுளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. மானமில்லை மானமிகும் பொருளும் இல்லை, மகத்துவமில்லை அணுவுமில்லை மத்தி இல்லை. ஞானமில்லை நேயமில்லை ஞாதாவில்லை, ஞாபிக்க நிற்கும் திருப்புடியேதொன்றும் இல்லை. நானமதென்றெண்ணிடும் அயலே இல்லை. நவையுற்ற சம்சாரம் அணுவும் இல்லை. வானமென அகண்ட சிதாகாயமாகி வரையிலதாயுளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. பிரமாத்ர சைதன்யம் தானும் இல்லை. பிரமேய சைதன்யம் தானும் இல்லை. பிரமாண சைதன்யம் தானும் இல்லை. பிறங்கு பல சைதன்யம் தானும் இல்லை. நிர்மாணம் செயலுற்றதெவையும் இல்லை. நிர்மாணம் செய்கின்றோன் தானும் இல்லை. பரிணாமம் விவர்த்த முதல்லவையும் இன்றி பங்கமிலாதுளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. மனதுடைய வாசனைகள் எவையும் இல்லை. மனதுடைய விருத்திகளும் எவையும் இல்லை. நனவு முதல் சம்சாரம் அணுவும் இல்லை. நாடியிடும் சம்சாரி தானும் இல்லை. துணிமருவும் துவைத்தமொரு காலும் இல்லை. துக்க சுக முதலியவோர் அணுவும் இல்லை. அநியமில்லாத கண்ட பரிபூன்றமாகி அச்சஞ்சலமாயுள்ளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. துன்னுமுடன் நான் என்றும் ஜகமே என்றும் தோற்றிடும் துவைத்தமுணர்விருத்தி இல்லை. மண்ணுகரி நான் என்றும் மற்றதெல்லாம் மயலென்றும் சாட்சியுணர்விருத்தி இல்லை. அந்நியமில் அகண்ட பர நானே என்றிங்கு அறியும் அகண்டாகார விருத்தி இல்லை. பின்னமுறும் விருத்திகளேதொன்றும் இன்றி பேதமில்லாதுளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. சகல மனோவிருத்திகளும் உதிப்பதில்லை. சகல மனோவிருத்திகளும் நசிப்பதில்லை. சகல மனோவிருத்திகளின் தோற்றமில்லை. சகல மனோவிருத்திகளின் அடக்கமில்லை. சகல மனோவிருத்திகளின் பாவமில்லை. சகல மனோவிருத்திகளின் பாவமில்லை. சகல மனோவிருத்திகளும் இன்றி என்றும் சாந்தமதாயுள்ளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. சர்வ மனோவிருத்திகளின் சாட்சி தன்மை சற்றுமில்லை. சர்வமெனும் நினைவும் இல்லை. பிரம்மமகம் அகம் பிரம்மம் எனவே செய்யும் பிரம்மான்ம பாவனையும் சிறிதும் இல்லை. சர்வமென சாட்சியென பிரம்மென்ன சர்வான்ம ஸ்வரூபமென பிரிவே இல்லை. ஒரு பிரிவும் ஒன்றாமல் அகண்டமாகி ஓருணர்வாயுள்ளது பரபிரம்மம் ஒன்றே. இருளும் இல்லை ஒளியும் இல்லை வெளியும் இல்லை. இரு மூன்று சமாதிகளும் இலவே இல்லை. வரு பிரம்ம வித்துமில்லை வரனும் இல்லை. வரியானும் வரிஷ்டனுமற்றாரும் இல்லை. ஒரு பொருளும் ஒரு காலும் இலவே இல்லை. உள்ளவெல்லாம் உணர்வுருவாம் பிரம்மென்றும் பிரம்மமதே நான் என்றும் அகண்ட ஞானம் பெற்றவனே பவபாஷ முக்தனாவன். ஓதிய இவ்வகண்ட பர பிரம்ம ஞானம் உராதவனே மகத்தான பாவியானோன். பேதமில்லா அகண்ட பர பிரம்ம ஞானம் பெறாதவனே மகத்தான ரோகியானோன். சாதகமாம் அகண்ட பர பிரம்ம ஞானம் சார்ந்தவனே சம்சார முக்தனானோன். ஆதலினால் முமுக்ஷுவெல்லாம் எவ்விதத்தும் அகண்ட பர ஞானத்தை அடைய வேண்டும். அகிலமுமே அகண்ட பர பிரம்மென்றும் அப்ரம்ம நான் என்றும் துணிவு கொண்டே அகமுறவே திருடமான அனுபவத்தை அடைந்தவன அகண்ட பர வடிவேயாகி இகழ் மனதின் சங்கல்ப விகல்பமெல்லாம் இழந்துடனே பவபாஷ முக்தனாவன். பகற்பொருளில் அணுவேனும் மையமில்லை, பரமசிவன் தன்னானை பரமார்த்தம்தான். எல்லாமாம் பிரம்மமது நானே என்னும் ஏகபர ஞானத்தை இசையா மூடன் கல்லாத கல்வியெல்லாம் கற்ற போதும் கரையில்லா பவக்கடலை கடவானென்றும் சொல்லாலும் சொல்லவோனா மகிமை கூர்ந்து சுத்த பர ஞானத்தை பெற்றவன்தான். பொல்லாத பவக்கடலை எளிதாய் தாண்டி பூரணமாம் பரபிரம்ம தீரம் சார்வன். உரமான அகண்ட பர நிச்சயத்தை உற்றவனே உலகத்தில் ஞானியானோன். பிரியாத அகண்ட பர நிச்சயத்தை பெற்றவனே பரபிரம்ம ஸ்வரூபமானோன். அரிதான இப்பொருளை பரேசன் முன்னம் அருளியவா நிதகனின கரைந்தேனித்தை. பரமான அன்புடனே ஒரு காலேனும் பங்கமர கேட்டுணர்வோன் பரமேயாவன். ஒருமையில்லை இருமையில்லை பலவும் இல்லை, உருவமில்லை அருவமில்லை ஒன்றும் இல்லை. மருளுமில்லை தெருளுமில்லை மனதே இல்லை, மகத்துவமில்லை அணுவுமில்லை மற்றொன்றில்லை. கருது ஜக ஜீவரில்லை ஈசனில்லை, காரியமும் காரணமும் எவையும் இல்லை. இருள் மறுவா பரமசிவன் ஜோதி ஒன்றே எப்போதும் ஏகமதாயிருக்கும் வஸ்து. மாய முதல் கல்பிதமாம் பொருளே இல்லை, மகத்துக்கும் மகத்தாகி அசங்கமாகி மேயமொடு மாதுருமானங்களின்றி மிக பெரிதாம் பூமான்ம ஸ்வரூபமாகி நேயமதாய் நிரதிசயானந்தமாகி நித்த பரிசுத்தமதாய் நிறைந்த சித்தாய் ஏகமதாம் பந்தமில்லா நித்த முக்த இயல்பான பரசிவமே இருக்கும் வஸ்து. இருக்கும் முதல் வேதாந்த வசனத்தாலும் இவையருளும் ஆசிரிய வசனத்தாலும் தர்க்கமெனும் திருடமான மனநத்தாலும் தடையறவே செய்கின்ற தியானத்தாலும் அருக்கன் முதல் ஜோதிக்கும் ஜோதியான அறிவுருவாம் பரமசிவம் அறிந்தவன்தான். திருக்குருவாம் அகண்ட பர சிவமேயாகி திரிசியமாம் பவபந்தம் அனைத்தும் தீர்வன். சித்துருவாம் சிவவடிவை அறிந்தவன்தான். ஜனனமோடு ஜரை மரணம் ஆதி வியாதி இத்தனையும் இல்லாமல் இழந்த போதும் இத்வைத தோற்றமிரை ஏனும் இன்றி அத்வைத பூரணமாம் சிவமேயாக அமைவதுவாம் அகண்ட பர முக்தி சார்வன். சத்தியமே இதுவென்று நிதாகனுக்கு சத்குருவாம் ரிபு முனிவன் சாற்றினானான்.
பூத பௌதிகம் மாதியனைத்துமே பொய்யலாலில்லை இல்லையதென்னவே நேதி செய்தபி நித்திய நிஷ்கள நிர்விகல்பகமான பரம்பொருள் மீதியாயுள்ள சென்றுரமாகவே மெய்ப்பொருட்டனை இங்கு விளம்புதல் மீதியாயுள்ள சென்றுரமாகவே மெய்ப்பொருட்டனை இங்கு விளம்புதல் தீதிலானந்த தாண்டவம் மாடுனம் தேவதேவன் அகண்ட ஸ்வரூபமே தீதிலானந்த தாண்டவம் மாடுனம் தேவதேவன் அகண்ட ஸ்வரூபமே தேவதேவன் அகண்ட ஸ்வரூபமே